So to start out, I have this animation, which I made earlier, which uses parenting to quickly attach items together, attach objects together. And this is using a series of loops, but it's really only a few gestures, right? If I look at this, I only have a few sets of keyframes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keyframes to get something that's actually kind of complex and moving together. So I'm going to recreate this or something similar, and I'm going to, so you can understand it. So to start out, what we're going to do is make a new composition, and I'm going to call this my main comp. And let's make a square composition. So I'm going to do something like 1200 by 1200. And let's make this 12 seconds long. And I'm doing 12 seconds because this is divisible by 6 or 3 or 4. And so that way, if I want something to loop, it will be more easy to find those whole numbers than if I used something like 11 or 13 or 7. So this just makes it a little bit easier on my end. And then I'm going to say OK. And my first step here is to create a new solid layer. So I right click inside, new and solid. And I'm just going to stick with this yellow one. And let's just lock it so it stays set. Let's make a couple of shapes. And so I'm going to go into this polygon tool and just create one shape here. And when I make it, let's hold down Shift so that way it stays straight. And I can use the align menu, just like in Photoshop and Illustrator, to align my objects directly in the center. And they are aligned by the anchor point here. So this anchor point, if it was at the bottom here, it would align based on that point. We're going to look at that in a second. So I'm going to rename this layer to hex, and I'm going to click out and then create a new shape layer. So let's make a circle. And I held down caps lock instead of Shift by accident, so I'm Command Z. And let's change the color of that to white. All right, cool. So here I have this shape there. And so I have my hex shape there and my shape layer here. And one thing that happened when I moved that is you'll see that this anchor point is no longer in the center. To recenter it, I can do it a couple ways, but one of the fastest ways is to go to Layer, Transform, and Center Anchor Point in Layer Content. And that's going to move it directly to the center. If you wanted to actually just move this using the tool, you would go to the Pan Behind tool, or Y, and actually move this down. And if you hold down Control or Command, it will snap to corners like so, or the very center. So I'm going to keep it right inside there. Now let's make a new layer. So I'm going to rename this first. So let's call it circle. And I'm going to make one more section that is a line. So I'm going to do that using the pen tool by creating a single line. And let's get rid of the fill. Let's give this a stroke. And I'm going to change this stroke color to something a little bit dark. Let's do a little bit of a darker green like that. And actually, I'm going to change this one to a green as well. Let's keep it in a green thing. Cool. Now, this line, one thing I can do is I'm going to center it just so it's close. And I'm going to design it a little more intentionally by clicking down into the contents, going to stroke. And here, if I go to taper, I can click this down and I can change the start length or the end length. And this is going to actually taper it. So I'm going to do the same on both. So 25 and 25. And then if it eases, it's going to round it out a tiny bit. So if I bring this up to 50 and 50, so you can use this to make nice leaves. This was brought into the program as a way of making arms, as a way to compete with plugins that were coming into After Effects. But it's a newer thing that's kind of cool. So I'm excited to play with it a little bit. So now I have my shapes that I'm working with. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to parent this object to this object. And the way that I do that is, let's zoom in a sec, is I'm going to use what is called the pick whip. This pick whip, if you click and drag, allows you to attach layers to other layers. And this is something that is really, really amazing, right? You can attach arms to bodies, and then heads to that same body, eyes to that face, hair to that face, pupils to an eye, right? So like everything can be attached and moved together, but still have independent animation. So with this, I'm going to connect it to this hex because I want the circle to be attached to that. And then this leaf, I'm going to attach to the circle. So now if I zoom back out, if I go in and I move this around, notice that everything else moves with it. And same thing if I rotate it, and I'm holding down W just to get into temporary rotation, that will move with it as well. So let's Command Z and Command Z, so it's back. So I'm going to start out with my hex with a rotation. So I'm going to do the stopwatch, jump forward to 6 seconds, and do 1 full rotation. And I'm going to put a loop out on this. So I hold down Option and click on the stopwatch, loop out, and cycle, just because I want it to repeat. Since this goes to 1 and it's linear, it'll go right back to the beginning again. So if I play this through, notice everything stays with it. Cool. Now let's go into the circle, and I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to do a rotation on it, jump forward to 4 seconds, and let's do 1 full rotation, hold down Alt or Option, and let's do loop out and cycle again. So now if we come back, see that now because this circle is moving, it's moving that along with it. So like if you're trying to create a clock, this would be one way to do that. There's other ways to do this as well. Now, what I want to do is instead of having this form rotate around this point, I want it to rotate around the circle. So what I need to do is do a couple of edits here. So I'm going to go to the anchor point tool, zoom in a little bit, hold down spacebar to move it up, go to the anchor point tool and move this to the edge. And I'm holding down Control or Command to be able to move it right to this edge here. And then I'm going to go Leaf, R, and I need it to go 90 degrees this way. So let's do -90. All right. And now let's move this right into the center of this shape. And I'm holding down Control just so it gets right on top. And actually, I'm just going to eyeball this right now. That looks fine. So now we will actually see it rotate with it. So it's rotating along with that circle because that circle is rotating. If I press U on all of these, you'll see those 2 keyframes are on each one. But say, for example, I have this leaf and I want to duplicate it so it actually like fans out. What I'm going to do is do Command D or Control D, and I'm going to rotate it just slightly. Command D, press R, rotate it slightly again. Command D, rotate it slightly again. And then all of these 3, Command D, so I'm rotating those, press R, and if I go back the other way, cool. So now we have that all together, but this looks kind of messy, right? Like if I twirl these up, whoop, Control A, U, or Control A and U, this is a lot of layers, and these are all technically one shape, right? This is kind of rotating around, and I kind of want to have those all be one thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here, and group these together into their own composition. I need this other leaf as well. So to do that, I'm going to right click and go to pre-compose. And pre-compose says take all of these objects, put them in a new composition. So this is basically grouping. Leaf, group. So now you'll see all of those leaves are inside that one object, and I can move behind that circle. Oh, but what happened? When all of those moved into that group, notice that the parent goes away. And when I come back here, this one is not attached to anything. So let's go back to the beginning, and I need to reattach this leaf group to that circle. So now it'll rotate along with it. And just because this is a composition, as we saw in the composition video, you can animate those properties. So if I wanted to change something about like the opacity, so if I turn this on and then at 6 seconds, this goes away, comes back, right? They're gonna slowly fade out to nothing. And they don't come back because there's no loop. So I can hold down Alt and I can do loop out, and let's do ping pong. Some extra stuff in there. I was not using the selector. So now this will ping pong back to itself. So this is a way of A, grouping objects together, B, parenting, and C, combining them all together to get a more unique and easier animation than what you would have originally. And this again is like really helpful for moving figures, attaching text to objects. So that was one way in the previous video with having the wiggle and the names of each expression attached to the objects. That was the way that I did that. So I hope you use this in your animations.